This is the Venturing Angler Podcast. I'm Tim Harden. In this episode, we're chatting with Peter Fong about fly fishing in Mongolia and his new book about a 60-day fly fishing adventure in Mongolia. We'll also chat about ecological issues facing the rivers in Mongolia and the incredible species that is the taimen. Let's chat with Peter. Okay, we're here with Peter Fong to talk about fly fishing in Mongolia and more. Welcome to the Venturing Angler Podcast.
Thank you.
So, I'm always curious about how folks ended up in Mongolia, and you have a book that I'd like to talk about at some point. But through the course of fly fishing, people are more attracted to some places than others. People move, people become guides in certain places. It sounds like for you, Mongolia had a big draw. What, in your experience of fly fishing, took you to such distant waters?
Well, actually, it was pretty dumb luck. I was living in China at the time. My wife was working for the Shanghai American School, and we had moved to Shanghai, which at that time was a city of about 20 million. It's bigger now.
Wow.
But we'd moved there directly from Prey, Montana, which is a little town in the Paradise Valley. And we had a house right off the Chicory fishing access, if you know where that is. So I could walk to the river every day with my dog, and I did. And to go from that place to one of the biggest cities in the world, it was shocking. I mean, we had lived in big cities before. I was born in New York, and we had lived in Tokyo before, and I thought I could handle it. But I took my rods down to the river in Shanghai, and I looked at the water floating by, and I mean, some days I would see dead pigs or oil slicks. I would watch the other guys fishing. They would pull up little perch or carp, and they'd be covered with boils.
Wow.
And I never actually cast. I didn't ever wanted to put my line in that water. But I mean, at least I was out and looking at a river. So I was literally going crazy. I was having the worst case of cabin fever that you can have when you're from Montana and you move to a big city. And I was just looking at the map thinking, where can I go? I got to get out of here. And there was Mongolia. It was a nonstop flight, 4 hours, same time zone. And so I was doing, I've been a writer for a long time, been writing for magazines for a long time. And so I wrote to all the outfitters in Mongolia and said, would you give me a journalist rate on a trip if I come and write a story about your operation? And Mongolia River Outfitters, Mark Johnstad was one of the founders. He replied and said, sure. And then, I don't know, maybe it was just a few months before the trip, one of the guides quit and I took his place. So it was literally that little bit of good fortune. And then once I got there, I realized this is a place I need to come back to every year.
Wow. It's
So
funny.
I mean,
Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say we didn't talk about Montana at all, but I'm in Livingston, so I'm Praise the next town over pretty much.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, so
And
you know exactly. There's that little school on the side of the East Side Highway across from Chico, their head school.
right.
My wife was the principal of
Oh,
that
how
school.
about that?
Yeah, and our kids were little then, and they went to that school. They had their swimming lessons at Chico. So
That's pretty cool.
I mean, I loved that place. I still miss it for
It
sure.
I grew up in Washington, D.C., lived in Denver, lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, and after a short amount of time in Livingston, even if I go to a large town, I'm like, this is chaos. So I can't imagine going from Prey to such a populated city in China.
Well, it's funny. We're living actually in Algeria at the moment. In Algiers, the capital, which is not as big as Shanghai, but I think it's between 5 and 6 million.
That's a lot.
And yeah, it's a lot. And there's a lot of cars and very few traffic lights. I think we went a week before we even spotted one traffic light. It's mostly just done with roundabouts and unregulated intersections. So the traffic here is insane.
I,
And yeah, when you think about I mean, it can be busy in the Paradise Valley, especially in the summer, but you get to a place like this and it resets all your baselines.
yeah, I bet. It's we have the issue in our house when it comes to traffic is if there's a train, we're gonna be 5 minutes late.
I
um,
remember that. I remember that because our kids played Little League and other games. You know where the games would be in town,
yeah,
and from our house, of course, we would have to cross the tracks to get to games.
that's funny. Yeah, that baseball field's in my neighborhood. That's a fun coincidence. Did you fly fish a lot when you were in Montana?
Yeah, quite a bit. I mean, I had been a guide in Yellowstone in the late 70s.
Wow.
And before we moved to Prey, we'd been living in Missoula in the Bitterroot Valley.
How about that?
So yeah, I mean, I fished or hunted every chance I got.
What was fly fishing in the Bitterroot Valley or in Yellowstone like prior to a river runs through it?
It was very pleasant. I mean, it could still be crowded, but I mean, in the Bitterroot in February and March, when you went to fish the Squaw Hatch, you had the river to yourself.
Wow.
There was nobody else out there. Actually, when my wife and I first moved there, I guess it was 1990. We didn't have children yet, and we took the canoe out on the Bitterroot on a warm day in February. It was shirt sleeve weather. There's still a little bit of snow on the ground, but the bugs were coming off and crawling along the snow. Um, and they just started rising to dry flies.
Oh
I
my
couldn't
gosh.
believe it. We had a bottle of champagne with us just for fun, but it turned out I thought, well, we're celebrating because we are never leaving this place.
Wow. Wow.
But yeah, I mean, I fished the Bitterroot a couple summers ago. It was in July, and during the day it can be pretty crowded. But a friend and we put the boat on around 5 o'clock, and we fished till a little bit past dark. And then once we got going, the people there just started to be fewer and fewer people. And once the fish were really rising, there was nobody left on the river. All the guides had gone home. So you can still find solitude, but it's definitely not as easy to find as it once was. I mean, I used to. This is terrible to say this. It sounds so like I hate people or something. But if I went down to a fishing access and then there was one other car there, I would go back home.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even get my rod out because I thought, oh, it's too crowded, or I'd go to another place. And the same for hunting. I would never even get out of the vehicle if there was another car there. I mean, I've changed my tune now, and sometimes I even go with other people. But in those days, I craved solitude, and it was a big part of the fun for me.
Yeah, I'm a wildlife photographer and I think it was a few weeks. No, I guess it was around New Year's Day or New Year's Eve. And I think I described Yellowstone um, that weekend as out of control. But in reality, there weren't that many people. So,
Yeah, yeah. If you go on like a Saturday when the Grizz or the Bobcats are playing and the weather's bad, the fishing can still be, you can still find solitude on the Madison, even inside the park,
That's cool.
but you have to pick your days. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I do avoid the weekends in there, so maybe that's part of my perspective. So it sounds like you found the right place to focus a good bit of your attention if you're someone in search of remoteness and solitude. Uh,
Well, yeah, I mean, where we are in Mongolia, the two rivers we work on, we do see other anglers, local anglers, and sometimes even other international anglers, but very, very few. And we don't see anybody else in drift boats, which is what we're doing. So we really do have the rivers to ourselves in a way that's impossible in North America. I can't think of any place. I mean, you can go down to Smith, and the feeling will be the same, but you're not going to get away from other people. There's still going to be other people floating and camping. Whereas where we are, we can go the whole week
wow.
often without seeing any other groups. I mean, we still see people, but they're local people who live there, and they don't build vacation homes on the riverbanks. You know, they're still living in their traditional gairs, and they're herding sheep and goats and cattle, or they're cutting hay. Actually, most Mongolians don't stay along the river in the summertime. They save the grass along the river for the wintertime.
Hmm.
So that's another reason why we get a little extra bit of solitude.
Prior to Mongolia, had you done much fly fishing travel, or was this going all in at once?
Not very much, I have to say. Um, I mean, we've been traveling around a lot, but usually, and I always carried rods with me. But Mongolia was really my introduction to um, that sort of international fly fishing tourism that's become more and more popular these days. When I first got there and I'd be talking to the guests, I, they'd be telling stories and I couldn't believe all the places that they'd been.
Huh, wow.
Now it's whatever, 18 years later, and I've been to some of those places too. And and I can see why it's so attractive. It is really, really fun.
You,
But when we were living in Montana, I didn't really think about it. I mean, I thought, well, I mean, people who live in Montana or in other places around the West, um, where fishing and hunting is available at a short drive from your house, you don't really think about the big expeditions and the 2 days worth of travel to get someplace. For me, if I could, I don't mind if I just go fishing or hunting for a couple hours. It doesn't have to be, and then I would just go before work or after work. Um, but if you don't live in a place like that, then I really understand. I mean, if you live in a big city, then I really understand the appeal of travel because it gives you something to daydream about, something to plan for. It's almost as much fun to plan for a trip as it is to go.
yeah, I always found I traveled more before living in Montana than I've found that when I was living in cities and thinking about a trip, the more the trip was planned out, the better, because it would consume more time and more energy, and I'd be thinking, in August about a trip in November and gearing up for
Yeah,
that
oh,
period
it's
of
it's
time.
fun, and
Right.
you tie flies, and you look at all your tippet material, and um, yeah, you wonder how many spare rods you're going to need.
Yeah.
All that planning is really fun. It's a nice distraction from work. You get home and uh, there's something else to think about.
You've been going to Mongolia for 18 years, was that right?
Yeah, I think I started in 2005 or 2006.
Wow. And a lot of people will visit a destination and check the box. Mongolia is a huge box, and then next they might think about the Seychelles or Russia or Iceland or something. Um, and then there's times when people just are, and I've had this experience in Argentina. I try to go every year where I just can't get enough. What was it about Mongolia that made you? I mean, it's almost been 2 decades. fall in love with the
Well, a
place.
lot of people say it's like Montana without the fences. Um, I mean, the landscape really is reminiscent of Montana. There are parts of the river that look like the Yellowstone. There are parts that look like the Bighorn. There are valleys where you come over a ridge and you could swear you're looking down on the Big Hole. Um, there's that because I mean I really have a sentimental attachment to Montana as well. But it's not, and really it's not just that. I mean the people, I mean the staff that we work with, a lot of the guides, we've been working together for more than 10 years. I've known some of the kids since they were teenagers, you know, helped train them, and so there's the human connection too. And then there's Timon, which they are. I mean, they're they really reset all your expectations for what a trout can be. I mean, when you see a 50-inch fish coming for a surface fly and missing, and then coming back and hitting it again, missing again. I mean, they are not afraid of anything. I've had fish take the fly literally right off the oar blade. It seems like when they get focused on something, they can't see anything else. They're just incredible fish. And then they can jump and they can run. They're not. I mean, they're not going to run like salmon into your backing, and especially because we can follow them with the boat. We don't like them to get too far away. But I think for me, the time and I really think of each fish more as an individual than I do for, say, a rainbow or a brown or even a big cutthroat. For one thing, they can live much longer. So there's years and years of experience bound up into the body of a fish that is more like what you would associate with a tarpon than with any other freshwater fish.
About how and they live. We were introduced to each other by Michael Caranci, and he and I did a podcast, and I forget what he told me.
I think they've lived. Um, where scientists has actually taken the otolith, the ear stone out of the fish, and they've discovered they could be at least 70. Um, but I don't know if anyone has ever established what the upper limit might be.
That's incredible.
They can live a long time. And because they live in such a cold climate, they don't grow exceptionally quickly unless they have access to salmon, where they can eat salmon. But there's no salmon in Mongolia, so they don't have that opportunity there. But it probably takes them 7 years, I think, to get to the point where they can spawn. And at that point, I think they're about 28 inches long. And then after that, in terms of length, they grow much more slowly. They really just put on girth as they get bigger and bigger. So it's kind of fun sometimes to catch a big fish and think, wow, this fish could be 30 years old, 40 years old. It makes us handle them extra carefully. I mean, we never want the fight to go too long, and we're always very respectful about photos, and keeping them out of the water as little as possible, and then just getting them back in the river. Because you would never want to lose a fish like that. A fish like that is just an amazing creature.
I can't imagine catching. I don't think I ever have caught catching a fish that's older than I am. That's that's pretty
Well,
impressive.
I'm so old now that I'm probably not going to do that either. But yeah, I mean, for a younger angler, it's within the realm of possibility.
Wow. And what type of uh, what are their populations like in such remote areas? Because I assume that what you're experiencing is as close to natural and normal, if you will, as it gets. What does that
Yeah,
look
I think
like?
our rivers really have healthy populations, or what the scientists consider healthy. Um, and what they're thinking for a productive river it's going to be 10 or 15 of the larger taimen per kilometer. So it's not a dense population, especially since all 10 might be in the same pool. So when you're going down the river, it's a huge advantage to have the boat, to be able to cover a lot of water. Um, and a lot of times when the water is lower, we can see the fish. So we even can sidecast to those big
Oh my
fish.
gosh. When have you ever been able to sight fish to as many as 10, if you will, in a pool?
Yeah, more than 10. I
Oh
mean,
my gosh.
sometimes you'll see 20 or 30 even. Actually, one time we saw more than 50, and we don't know why. And we've never seen that kind of congregation of fish in the same place or any other place again. But it just happened that the first guys down through that run had a drone, and they put up the drone. Um, and you can see just in the frame, I think there's 48, and there's some fish outside the frame. And we have no idea what they were doing, why they were there. It was summertime, not usually the time when they're moving. So there's a lot we don't know about taimen, and I think that's part of why I think it's so important that we just keep studying them, keep protecting the river, keep keep looking at the population and trying to decide, what makes, how do these fish survive? They're such an old fish. They split off from the other members of the trout family a long time ago,
Wow.
and they haven't had to change. I mean, whatever they're doing, as far as living in rivers in Mongolia and Russia, it's worked for them. It's working less well now, though. I mean, just because of the pressures of humanity and of climate change. But what they were doing enabled them to live long and grow huge. So up till now, at least, it's been a really winning strategy. But we don't know a lot about the other aspects of the river too. There's in one river that we work, there are minnow migrations, and sometimes you see minnows coming up the river in big bait balls, just like you see anchovies or sardines in the salt. And the taimen will just gorge themselves on those minnows. And we know that the migration for the minnows has something to do with spawning, with the minnow spawning behavior, but we don't really know. And we don't know how far they go or why they choose to do it that way. But the taimen know. I mean, they'll be waiting behind boulders for the minnows to pause when they have to go up the rapids. And yeah, sometimes you'll catch a taimen on a big streamer that doesn't match the minnows at all. But the minnows will just be pouring out of his mouth. I mean, he was already stuffed, but he saw something bigger and decided he wanted to eat that too.
Wow. I think it was in the film, the Kamchatka Steelhead Project, that someone made the comment that a good angler is a scientist. In your many years in Mongolia, do you feel like you've been discovering things or observing things that might be new information about the fish?
Oh, we definitely have, because we have like science projects baked into our program. So we're always doing something, and that's been since I started working for the company. And right now we're partnering with the Wild Salmon Center to to bring real scientists up to the river for a couple weeks every summer. The project they worked on last summer was trying to decide what the dissolved oxygen requirements were for taimen. So they actually caught taimen, put them in tanks that they built inside the boat, where they could seal it and then measure their oxygen consumption over, I think it was like a 10 or a 12-hour period, and then release them.
Wow.
And I was skeptical. I thought, wow, that's so complicated. How can you pull that off?
Right.
But they did it.
That's neat.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, we're learning a lot all the time. And um, yeah, even it's fun just to watch year classes go through the river, because we're always measuring and counting the fish. as we're going down with the anglers. Um, and some years, it's usually 2 years beforehand, the water was high. And so there was a lot of spawning habitat, and the fry get to move outside of the main stem of the river where all the predators are, and they get a little bit bigger. And then, they don't have to come back into the main stem till the water starts to drop. And so that increases their survival rate. And we can see it. Like there'll be a year where we'll catch a lot of fish in the 20-inch range. And so it makes a bulge, and we can follow that bulge up. Like the next year, we'll catch a lot of fish, like 24, 25 inches. And the following year, they'll be 28 inches. And the next year, we'll see them into the 30s. And that's really fun to watch. Of course, the bulge gets smaller and smaller. The height of the bulge gets smaller and smaller as the years go on, because there's mortality happening. We don't know why. Just the natural mortality of the fish. I'm sure there's a lot of reasons, but we try to make sure that anglers are not the reason.
Well, you've talked about years of observing the fish and studies and exciting trips and ecological issues. And I think that connects well to a book that you have out now. And I'd love to discuss that. What's the name of the book and the story that led to the book?
Well, the book is called Rowing to Baikal, and it really started as kind of a guide's daydream. We were sitting around the fire one night, um, right near the river, and the water's going past. And I thought to myself, where does this water go? Because it's just a beautiful river. It's an amazing canyon, big big cliffs, 300, 400 foot high, beautiful rock walls. Colors are changing all the time. In any other part of the world, this would be a national park, but in Mongolia, this part of the river, the canyon section, is actually just outside the border of a protected area. And I thought, I wonder where it goes. And when I got back to civilization and had internet access, I looked, and it went to Lake Baikal, which is, the biggest body of fresh water in the world. It's so big that the water of all the Great Lakes could fit inside of it.
Wow.
That's how big Baikal is. You think Michigan, Erie, Wisconsin, Superior, Ontario, all of them put together would not fill Lake Baikal. So this river that we had been, taking small groups of guests down every week is really the headwaters of the main river that flows into Baikal, the river that supplies more than half of the annual inflow into Baikal. And then once I found that out, I thought, I got to go all the way. I just have to get in a drift boat here and stay in it until I get to Baikal. Of course, that took lots of years of planning and grant writing and fundraising to make it all happen. But that's how it started, just guides talking about what we could do if we didn't have to get out of the boat at the end of the day.
What was that experience like? I can't imagine.
It was hard. It was fun. The actual trip itself, I was telling somebody the other day that I would do it again because it was a lot of fun, except that I would never be able to assemble that same cast of characters again.
Oh yeah.
But it was challenging. I mean, as much as I always like going a little bit farther. I mean, whether I'm fishing or hiking, if I'm hiking, I always want to go around the next corner or up to the next ridge or just to see what's around the bend. And when I'm fishing, it's the same. I never want to get out of the boat at the end of the day. I always want to go a little bit farther just to see what's around the next bend or see what the next pool looks like. And I mean, to be able to have the luxury of just being able to do that for 2 months was great, especially since we didn't know where we were going. It was always a surprise. It's not like we were going to a place where there's a road that follows the river the whole way, or that there's information, or that there's, a number you can call to find out what the water levels are. None of that information is available. You just have to stay on the river and take whatever it throws at you. And it just, by luck, we happened to be going down the river in one of the rainiest falls of the century. So usually we chose September and October because we thought it would be the low water time of year, but instead we just got rained on constantly and the river was flooding and it snowed a couple of times and there was so much water coming in that the lake itself, Baikal, reached its highest level, I think, that's been recorded in the past 50 years. So we had some challenging conditions. But still, I mean, I would do it again because it's so, I don't know, the only word I can think of is a luxury. It's such a luxury to have that amount of time where you don't need to be someplace. I mean, you have that in your mind, of course, I need to get to the lake, but I didn't need to get to the lake on any particular day. I just needed to get there, in one piece with the boat.
I can't imagine the perspective that that gave you about your normal life. And, if you're anything like me, you're thinking, okay, at 9 is this, at 10 is this, at 10:55 I need to do this to be ready for that. It's I think a lot of us have adapted to that. Did you find it hard to get acclimated on the trip, and did it affect you when you came home?
I didn't find it hard to get acclimated. The hard part for me, the anxiety for me, was just making sure that we didn't do anything dangerous or stupid. That that the expedition as a group, because there were many people involved, that of course there's no way I could even have everyone within sight at any particular time on any given day. We had sometimes 3 boats, and obviously once the boat is around the corner, it's around the corner. You can't see what's happening to the other people. So that was probably my biggest source of anxiety, not the the day-to-day, I have no idea where we're going anxiety. But yeah, it's hard to describe what that does to your brain. I definitely had a hard time adjusting. I probably haven't adjusted even now, 5 years later, because I still think about it and I still want something like that again, even though I realize it's not very practical, and writing grants is not the most entertaining way to spend a whole winter.
Right.
And also I don't have, I had a compelling reason for wanting to go there, with the threat of the dams being built and really the lack of information there is in English or German or French, or except for Russian. There's not a lot of research done on that in that part of the world. So I had a story that I could tell when I was writing grant proposals, and I don't think I could write one where I was just saying I feel like I need to go on a trip and get away from it all. There was another friend who was helping us. She had been on a trip that went down another big river. That was a huge trip, an all-women trip. Her name is Sabra Purdy. They went like 3,000 miles. And while I was writing the grants, she said, "You really need to keep this in focus, that this can't be a vacation for dorks. You have to have a purpose for your trip." And I when she said that to me, it really rang a lot of bells, because I was thinking, oh, we have scientists, we have activists. It's, that's all on the trip. That's all we really need. But even that is not really a reason for someone else to give you money to go. You need, something I mean, I felt a lot of responsibility spending other people's money on this trip. I really felt like we had to deliver something. And then what I thought we were going to deliver, in the end, we couldn't because there was so much political peril with going into Russia. We thought we were going to have TV crews and news reporters and drawing attention to the fact that dams were proposed for this river, but instead we kind of snuck in and snuck out. We pretended we were tourists and we tried to draw as little attention as possible because we didn't want to get arrested. So everything changed, and I think for me the book is really what the trip produced. I mean, I don't know what the impact of the book will be, but I mean, I hope that when people read it, that even if they're not moved to contribute to the protection of that river, the Seleng or the Selenga, they call it in Russian, that they'll think about their own home river, someplace a little bit closer to home that might need a little more love or a little more protection than it's getting now.
So this trip was in 2018. What has developed, or what is the current status of this? I mean, I saw one of the filmmakers from Damnation show, Matt Stoker's show, Damnation to a Group of People once, and I'll never forget him saying that the word dam comes from condemn, and you're condemning a river to death. And that's how I think of it now. I see reservoirs, and I know that some of them are important, but they're catastrophic ecologically. What has been happening, and what's happening with this dam?
Well, right now, the situation on this river is on hold. I mean, the way a lot of big hydropower projects work in the third world, not just in Mongolia, is that the funding and the construction is supplied by China. China gives a loan to the country, who then in turn hires a Chinese construction company to build the dam. So China gets its money back in that sense. And so that was the plan here in Mongolia too. But because the water flows into Russia, into Baikal, which is Russia considers its crown jewel, the Russians don't want the dam to be built. And so Putin himself intervened with China to make them pause, to pull back that loan and repurpose it somewhere else. I think they ended up building a highway to the new international airport instead. So the dam there is on hold, but meanwhile they're building a dam on another river further to the west in Mongolia, the Hovd, which is also a fragile place. And that one looks like there are people trying to stop that one, but that one looks like it's going to go through. They've already been working on it for 2 years, and they're determined to finish that one. So that might take a little pressure off the Selenga. I'm not sure, but I mean, I completely capacity right now. It's almost all coming from oil or coal, and they're working on solar projects and they're working on wind projects, but they would like to have hydro too. But I think it's the wrong thing on this river, and I realize it's not my position. I mean, I'm an American. It's not. I don't have any standing here. It's not my right to tell them what they should do with their river, especially since they're really subject to a lot of kind of bullying from Russia. If Russia decides Mongolia is not doing what they should be doing politically, they can cut off the power, and they've done that, or they can restrain gas and oil imports. And and they've done that before too. So Mongolia is in a really hard place. I mean, it's completely surrounded by Russia and China, and they're the two biggest trading partners by far. So they have a fine line that they have to navigate. I mean, they want to be energy independent, of course, um, but they also don't want to destroy the natural heritage that they have, and they have been doing a lot of good things. They have this plan to protect 30% of their landscape, and if you can imagine that in the United States, if 30% of the land was a national park, how great that would be.
Yeah.
And but we're not even close. But Mongolia is getting close. I think they might be up to 25 or 27% now. So they are doing a lot of good things. I definitely, when I think that the dam is a bad idea, and I know in my heart that it is a bad idea, it's not because I'm thinking that Mongolia is has evil in its heart and wants to do the wrong thing here. I just think they're in a difficult place in terms of their development and the politics, not only internal politics, but the great power politics that are swirling all around them, which the U.S. is involved in too.
In addition to dams, you mentioned climate change earlier. Are you seeing any other ecological issues, or are you seeing any other causes of decline that?
Well, I mean, certainly climate change and the unpredictability of rains, and uh, the biggest thing that I think that affects local people, especially herders, is that rains that used to come, gradually a little bit, um, month by month, now come in these like very, very concentrated, dense storms that just drop a lot of rainfall on the ground in a short period of time and cause a lot of erosion. So that problem, combined with overgrazing, I think that's really the biggest near-term problem facing the river right now. I was just reading the other day that there's 64 million head of livestock in Mongolia this year, which sounds like a lot, except that's down by almost 10% from last year.
Wow.
Um, so, I mean, for a herder, really, your sheep and goats are everything. And it's your savings account, your checking account, your 401k, your Social Security, all in one. I mean, all your wealth is tied up in those animals. And just the way the weather's been going, where you can have killing storms any time of year, and you never know how the price is going to go. And uh, it's definitely hard for herders to make a living. But on the other hand, they're really good at it. They've been doing it for a couple thousand years, so or longer.
Yeah. I
The Nature Conservancy. Oh, I was going to say the Nature Conservancy is working hard right now in Mongolia, trying to reduce overgrazing, and we've been trying to work with them too.
that was perfect because I was going to ask you next. You mentioned the Wild Salmon Center. There's the Nature Conservancy for folks who are interested in learning more about these issues or being involved in some way, whether it's through donations or other opportunities. Where would you suggest people head?
Um, well, if you care about rivers and taimen, I would go to the Wild Salmon Center. And the Wild Salmon Center has an international taimen initiative. And half of the royalties from the book, half the royalties from Rowing to Baikal will go to that initiative. But the World Wildlife Fund and the Nature Conservancy have been working in Mongolia for a long time and doing very good work as well.
The, um, your book is it is a 1,000-mile float, I believe, and it's over the course of 2 months. I can't imagine how rich the book is with thoughts about your experiences, and I mean, just the idea that you brought up earlier of not being able to see the boat in front of you, it's because you don't know what's around the next bend, right? And so it's really in many ways an ultimate adventure. And so I want to encourage everybody to go check out the book. Where can they learn more about the book or purchase it?
You can find it on bookshop.org, on Amazon, of course. I think every book is on Amazon. The book has its own website, rowingtobaikal.com. And the publisher's name is Leta Books, Latah. And if you go to letabooks.com, you can order from there as well.
Terrific. And we'll have the link to the books page in the description of this podcast and encourage everybody to go check it out. There's also a video trailer there for the book that features time and is pretty compelling. Peter, thank you for coming on the podcast. This was hopefully the first of more conversations because I feel like I have a million questions now and I still need to check out the book. And so hopefully we'll chat again soon. But until then, thanks for coming on. And, again, encourage everybody to go check out the book and also support the Wild Salmon Center and the Nature Conservancy.
Well, thank you. Actually, I wanted to ask you
Oh,
where you had been and where you would go back to other than Argentina. If you
well,
had
yeah, it's
your choice, yeah, where would you go? I mean, if you go to a place every year for 20 years, where would you go?
it's funny. Argentina was on my list, but not at the top of it. And I was sort of pressured by a group of people to go. And what I still don't understand, and I've mentioned this on the podcast before, is it's it's a lot like Montana or Wyoming. Uh, Yet everyone I was with, at least on the most recent trip, was from Montana or Wyoming, and there were people that just go back over and over and over again.
Ah, that's interesting. Have you
Yeah,
been to Chile?
I might go in March. I've seen Chile from Argentina, but that's as close as I've been. A mile away, kind of thing. Um,
I went to Chile for the first time a couple of years ago because a lot of our guides are from Chile. I
mm,
mean, just the season works out for them. It's their off season in the summer in Mongolia. And so if they want to piece together year-round work, so they do Chile in their summer and then Mongolia in our summer. And I'd been meaning to go for years, and finally I went, and I had a great time. We didn't fish that many days because there were so many other fun things to do, and the food was so good, and the wine was so good. I could definitely see going back there. So yeah, I'd be really curious to see uh, how you think the two countries compare. I've never been to Argentina.
yeah, I'm very curious because I know they're. I mean, again, I've looked across some fields and seen Chile, but I haven't been there, and I know that the terrain can be a bit different. And um, yeah, I'm also
How's your Spanish?
I when I was in when I was in school a long time ago, I gave myself the option of learning Spanish or learning the mandolin, and I made the wrong choice. I, g-
Well, what's wrong with the mandolin?
well, I haven't played it in years, and so now I have
Oh,
nothing to bring to the table, and I
uh,
keep going to Spanish speaking countries. So, um,
yeah, I would like to learn to speak better Spanish. But,
that's high on my list,
yeah.
especially because I keep going there. I have deep bonding experiences with people and can't communicate as well as I'd like to. But I do love rivers and mountains, and so other places like um, Iceland and Greenland, and would like to see more areas of Alaska, Chile, of course.
Have you been to Iceland?
No,
No, you're just thinking about it. Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah, I've been thinking about Iceland too. I'd really like to go there and to Greenland for char. I worked in Alaska for 3 summers, and my wife and I actually did our honeymoon there. So I kind of want to go back there as well. She actually filled up, one of those little airport size whiskey bottles full of water from Lake Clark,
neat.
and she said, "Okay." someday we're going to come back here and put the water back in.
I love
And
that.
that was on our honeymoon. But now it's been a lot of years and we haven't been back.
Yeah, I'd really like to go back there, and um, also I'd really like to go to the North Pole.
I would really like to go to the North Pole too. I was so close. I was so close to going there one time. I actually had an assignment to go there.
Wow.
Um, and we were living in China at the time, and I had worked out my flight and everything. And then at the last moment, my invitation got pulled back and given to this beautiful female Russian journalist. So I totally understand why the outfitter did this, but I was heartbroken. I wanted to go so bad. It was a ski trip. They would take you by helicopter and drop you like 20 kilometers from the pole, and then you had to
Wow.
ski to the pole.
That's
It
cool.
just it sounded so much fun,
Yeah.
but didn't happen.
Now my cousin Becky recently went to Antarctica, and then I used to be a teacher, two former students a couple months ago, or maybe last month, went to Antarctica, and I'm like, okay, this is actually, these types of places are actually reachable. And
Yeah, they're reachable. I was thinking it would be even possible to fish in Antarctica. If you
I
went in the Antarctic summer, I think you could fish. I think you could fish there. There's apparently lots of fish in certain places that
oh
are
boy.
relatively close to the surface. So, I mean, I think they could be caught on fly. I don't, I don't know what it would take to mount that kind of expedition, or whether it'd be just silly. But I think it would be beautiful. I mean, to see the birds and all the wildlife, and then the landscape, and then to actually catch a fish on a fly. I would love that.
Sounds like we need to write some grant proposals.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how yet to work how the fly fishing fits in. Like have you been watching that Costa tagging project? And
Yes. Yeah, and
yes,
I'm
I mean,
in
I was like, oh, that's great. I think that is such a good idea, and I'm so glad that people are doing that. And I wish I could have gotten involved in it somehow. It looks like so much fun.
yeah,
And
I do some work for Indie Fly, and so they're involved, and they were involved in the Magdalena Bay tagging. I didn't get to go, but I can use my imagination
wow,
about what about what possible future
yeah,
involvement could be, or when you see people
yeah.
going, it's hard not to imagine joining them at some point. But
Well, I think that fly anglers have helped a lot with the research with arapaima as well.
yeah,
I had a trip there planned for the pandemic that got canceled. A lot got canceled during the pandemic. The pandemic was actually in 2020. It was the year I was turning 60, so I thought
oh
I'm going to plan a lot of trips. So I planned Brazil for Peacock Pass and for arapaima and payara and all those species, and Cameroon, Scotland, as well as just my ordinary going to Mongolia for 4 months or 5 months. It was just going to be my big year. And then I got in the Cameroon trip because it was in February, and then everything else disappeared.
yeah, 2020 was gonna be my big year. I was gonna go to Belize, Brazil, Bolivia, the Bahamas, and Bristol Bay. I was going to tackle the
Oh,
bees.
wow. It was a bee year. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
and maybe I would have seen you in South America, but or in
Uh,
the Amazon, but and ended up being a pandemic, and I had a kid, and so
yeah. Well, we were living in Morocco then, and we actually were locked inside. We weren't
wow,
allowed to go out. We couldn't leave the country. Um, and Moroccans who were outside the country couldn't come back in. They just shut the borders,
wow.
um, which is the same thing they did to Mongolia. If you were inside, you couldn't get out, and if you were out, you couldn't get in. Um, but I had been to Belize a couple of years before, and I really recommend that. It's really fun.
I did make it
Also,
there.
also Bolivia. Bolivia is really fun.
Yeah, I'd love to go there.
uh, yeah.
I did make it to Belize in February of 2023, and yeah, starting to put some trips together now and get back to normal life, especially now that the kiddos in preschool. So, but I've been happily enjoying Montana.
Yeah, no, there's nothing not to like really about what you can do in Montana just on a long weekend,
Right. Exactly. Well, that story you told,
especially from Livingston. Gosh, yeah.
yeah, true. Well, in the beginning, when
Well,
you were
when
talking about the big hatches in the winter, it's in the 50s here today. So now it makes me think I should
yeah.
see what I can find before preschool pickup.
Well, on our first year in the Paradise Valley, I thought, okay, I'm going to try to catch a fish on a dry fly in every month of the year, and it was actually just it wasn't hard at all. There was no challenge,
Wow.
because if you go, when it in February, if you just go down to where the hot springs come in, there's on a sunny afternoon, there's always midge hatches. Um, and that year, actually, our daughter was in kindergarten, and I don't know if this is still true, but in those days, Montana only had half day kindergarten. So I would pick her up at noon and say, okay, we're going fishing.
Nice.
And she would just take off all her clothes and sit in the hot springs. And I would just go downstream a little bit and fish. And, we would just stash the whitefish in snowbanks, and then we'd go home and smoke them. And
Neat.
yeah, it was, I think, I don't know how it was uh, for her, but I think it was kind of an idyllic childhood because we'd see foxes, we'd see elk, we saw grizzlies. I mean, I'm sure she still remembers that now, even though she lives in Kentucky now. But
Well, maybe Kentucky has something to do with that because I keep hearing from people this is such a great place to raise a kid. It's such a great place to raise a kid. And having grown up in Washington, D.C. in the 80s and 90s, I cannot even comprehend the different experience that my daughter's having where I might point to an elk or a bison out the window and she's fairly indifferent to it. She went skiing yesterday um,
yeah, that's great.
in the middle of a Tuesday. So it's, yeah, hopefully she has something to be psyched about over
Oh
time.
yeah, she will. Those are formative experiences that you can't. I don't think you can avoid that imprint. Our daughter, I think she might have been 11 before she went through a year in her life where she didn't celebrate her birthday in Yellowstone.
Oh,
So
neat, neat.
so yeah, I mean, that she'll never she'll never um, lose her love for that place or that landscape.
Yeah, I think it was her first or second birthday that we took her to Old Faithful. So that's neat. That's neat to see that parallel. May,
Yeah, oh, that's great. Yeah, that's lucky.
maybe one day we'll be hanging out and talking about our shared experiences of Mongolia.
Yeah, you should try to come. It's really well. You probably Michael's the guy to know if you want to
True,
make it. I mean,
true.
if you can come on short notice, like on a last minute trip, it's it's I have to say it's really worth it. And you need to make the time for it because for a week of fishing, you really kind of need to take almost 2 weeks off just because it takes so long to get there from Montana. But once you see the place and see the fish, it's I mean, it's really a life changer for a lot of people. We had one guest who came back, I think, 11 times before he got
Wow.
Alzheimer's and finally stopped coming. And we have many people who've come 4, 5, 6 times. Um, so it really, I know it's not just me. It's really a place that kind of it sticks it sticks to people, um, that experience.
Well, it's high on my list, and as is reading your book. And so, thanks again for coming on, and I really enjoyed the conversation.